It was one of those mornings that started just like any other, quiet and ordinary, with the sky still half asleep. The soft orange light of dawn spilled across the narrow street, touching the tops of cars and rooftops. Birds were starting to wake, their faint chirps mixing with the distant hum of traffic far away. She stepped out of her small house, locking the door behind her, holding a travel mug in one hand and her worn handbag in the other. Her breath formed small clouds in the cool air. It was early, earlier than she liked, but her shift started at 7 sharp, and she hated being late. She walked quickly down the driveway, her shoes crunching lightly on the gravel. The neighborhood was still, except for a few garbage bins standing in a row by the curb. It was trash day, and the bins waited like silent soldiers in the misty morning. She barely noticed them. Her mind was somewhere else, on the long day ahead, the pile of work waiting for her, the bills on the counter she still hadn't paid. Life had become a routine, a loop that kept repeating. Wake up, rush to work, come home tired, and do it all over again. She sometimes wondered when things had stopped feeling new, when her life had started to feel so predictable. As she walked, she took a sip of her coffee. It was too hot, but she didn't mind. The warmth gave her comfort, something to hold on to as she faced another busy day. The street smelled faintly of wet grass and trash, not pleasant but familiar. Somewhere a dog barked once, then went quiet. A small truck passed by at the end of the street, its tires hissing on the wet pavement. She glanced at her watch and sighed. If she didn't hurry, she'd get caught in traffic near the intersection. She quickened her steps, brushing a stray hair out of her face. Nothing about that morning hinted that anything unusual was about to happen. Everything felt normal, too normal. She passed the row of bins without looking, her eyes fixed on her car parked near the sidewalk. Her thoughts drifted again, about her friend's message she hadn't replied to, about the tired face she'd seen in the mirror earlier. She was only halfway down the path when a sound made her stop. It was faint, so soft she thought she'd imagined it. A small broken cry, almost like the mew of a kitten. She turned her head slightly, listening. Silence followed. She waited a few seconds, shrugged, and started walking again. Then she heard it again. This time, it was clearer. A high, shaky sound. Not the cry of an animal, but something else. Something that made her heart skip a beat. She froze. The sound came again, short and weak. It was coming from somewhere near the trash bins. Her first thought was that maybe someone had thrown away a litter of kittens. It had happened before in her old neighborhood. She looked around, scanning the quiet street. No one was out. The houses were still dark. The cry came again, soft but urgent, like a tiny call for help. She set her coffee down on the hood of her car and slowly walked back toward the bins. Her heart was beating faster now. She felt a strange mix of fear and concern, but curiosity pulled her closer. She crouched beside one of the bins and listened again. The sound came from a black trash bag lying beside it, half covered by another torn one. For a moment she hesitated. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe she was imagining things. But then she heard it once more, that fragile, trembling cry, and all doubt disappeared. She carefully pulled at the edge of the bag, trying not to rip it open too quickly. The smell of damp plastic and spoiled food hit her nose. She winced, turning her head slightly, but her hands kept moving. Then she saw it. A small movement inside, like a twitch. Her breath caught in her throat. She pulled back more of the plastic, her fingers trembling. And there, wrapped loosely in an old towel, was a tiny bundle, pink, fragile, and crying. For a split second, her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. A baby. A real baby. Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out. The world around her seemed to freeze. She stared, unable to believe it. The baby's face was scrunched, its little fists waving weakly, the cry barely more than a whisper. She dropped to her knees, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Oh no, no, no." Her first instinct was to pick the baby up, but she hesitated. What if she heard it? What if it was sick or hurt already? She looked around wildly, as if someone might appear, someone who could explain this. But the street was empty. Only the sound of the baby's cry filled the air. She swallowed hard and reached down carefully, lifting the towel just enough to see the tiny face. The baby was cold, its cheeks pale. Her instincts took over then, not logic, not thought, just pure human care. She took off her scarf and wrapped it gently around the baby, holding it close to her chest. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered softly, her voice trembling. "It's okay. I've got you now." The baby quieted for a moment, its little body trembling in her arms. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away. She pulled out her phone with one hand and dialed emergency services, explaining what she had found, her voice barely steady. As she waited for help to arrive, she sat down on the curb, holding the baby close to her body to keep it warm. She could feel the tiny heartbeat against her chest, faint but alive. Every minute felt like an hour. She kept glancing toward the street, listening for sirens, afraid that if she looked away, the fragile life in her arms might slip away. When the first sound of an ambulance echoed in the distance, she felt her shoulders sag with relief. The flashing lights appeared soon after, and 2 paramedics jumped out. She handed the baby to them with shaking hands, her eyes never leaving its face. The older paramedic looked at her, surprise and admiration in his eyes. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "You might have just saved this baby's life." She nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight, her heart still racing. She watched as they placed the baby in a small carrier, checking its breathing, wrapping it in blankets. The sound of the baby's soft crying was replaced by the low hum of medical voices and equipment. After the ambulance drove away, the street fell silent again. The morning sun had risen higher now, spilling golden light over the quiet houses. But for her, everything had changed. She stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had found the baby. Her coffee sat forgotten on the car hood, now cold. She finally picked it up, her hand still trembling slightly. The ordinary morning she'd started with was gone. In its place was something she couldn't yet understand, a moment that would stay with her forever. She looked up at the sky, her eyes glassy, a mix of shock and sadness and strange gratitude filling her heart. She didn't know why she had been the one to hear that cry, or what would happen next, but deep inside, she knew one thing for certain. She would never walk past a trash bin again without remembering this morning. And as she got into her car, she sat quietly for a few moments before starting the engine. The street looked the same, peaceful, ordinary. But she didn't feel the same. Something inside her had shifted, something she couldn't name yet. The sound of that small, fragile cry still echoed in her ears, soft but powerful, a sound that had changed everything. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "Thank you for letting me hear it." Then she started the car and drove off, unaware that this morning would be the beginning of a story far greater than she could imagine. The rest of that day passed in a blur. She went through the motions of work, but her mind wasn't really there. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that small face again, pink cheeks, tiny fingers, eyes barely open. The sound of the soft cry still echoed in her head. She had heard hundreds of cries in her life, but nothing like that one. That sound had come from a place of fear and need, and it had found her. She couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if she hadn't heard it. What if she had been in a hurry and driven off? What if someone else had walked by and ignored it? Those thoughts made her stomach twist. It scared her to think how close that little life had come to ending before it even began. When her shift finally ended, she drove home slowly. The same street looked different now. The bins were empty, the garbage truck had come and gone, and there was nothing left to show what had happened that morning. But to her, it felt like that spot was marked forever, a quiet reminder that life could change in a second. She sat in her car for a few minutes before getting out. The house looked the same as always, but it didn't feel the same. Inside, she placed her bag on the table, sat down and stared at her hands. They were still shaking slightly. She replayed every moment in her head. The sound, the search, the discovery, the paramedics. It had all happened so fast. Her phone buzzed. It was a call from a number she didn't know. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Hi, this is Officer Reynolds with the local police department," a calm voice said. "You're the one who called about the infant this morning, correct?" "Yes," she said softly. "We just wanted to thank you again for your quick response," the officer continued. "The baby's stable and under medical care now. We're starting an investigation and we might need to speak with you again later." Is the baby okay?" she asked, her voice tight. "Yes," the officer said. "She's doing well, thanks to you. She was cold and weak, but she's responding well to care." She repeated. The single word sank in, and a small, unexplainable warmth filled her chest. "She's a girl." "That's right," the officer replied. "We'll keep you updated as we know more. Have a good evening, ma'am." When the call ended, she sat quietly, holding the phone in her hand. A girl, a tiny baby girl. Somehow, knowing that made it feel even more real. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt louder. The ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, the faint rustle of wind outside. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the cry in her head. It was strange how one sound could change everything. The next morning, she woke up early and made a cup of tea. She didn't turn on the TV or check her phone. She just sat there lost in thought. She felt an urge she couldn't quite explain, to go to the hospital to see how the baby was doing, to make sure she was really okay. But she hesitated. What if they didn't let her in? What if it wasn't her place? By noon, she couldn't resist. She drove to the hospital, the same one where she worked, though in a different department. At the reception desk, she hesitated again before speaking. "I was wondering if I could check on the baby that was found yesterday morning," she said carefully. The nurse looked up, surprised. "Oh, you mean the little girl from the news? The one someone found near the trash?" She nodded. "Yes, I was the one who found her." The nurse's expression softened instantly. "Oh, I see. Well, she's in the pediatric unit. I can't promise they'll let you in, but I'll ask." A few minutes later, a woman in a white coat approached. She introduced herself as one of the pediatric doctors. "You're the one who found the baby?" the doctor asked warmly. "Yes," she said. "I just wanted to know if she's okay." "She's doing better than we expected," the doctor said. "She was dehydrated and cold, but she's responding well. We don't know much about where she came from yet, but she's strong. Would you like to see her? Just for a minute." Her heart jumped. "Can I?" The doctor smiled. "Just for a moment." They walked through the quiet corridor, the air filled with the soft beeps of monitors and the scent of disinfectant. When they reached the small nursery room, she saw her, the same tiny baby now wrapped in a fresh pink blanket, sleeping peacefully in a small crib. She stood there quietly, afraid to move or even breathe too loud. The baby looked so small yet so alive. The sight made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. She didn't know why, but she felt connected to her, as if that cry had reached not just her ears but something deep inside her heart. "She's beautiful," she whispered. The doctor nodded. "She is, and lucky too. You were in the right place at the right time." She smiled faintly, but her eyes stayed on the baby. "I don't think it was just luck," she said softly. After a few minutes, she thanked the doctor and left, but the image of the baby stayed with her all day. She couldn't stop thinking about the little face, the small fingers curled up in sleep. Over the next few days, she followed every bit of news she could find. The police were looking for whoever had left the baby there, but there were no leads yet. Reporters were calling it the miracle infant, and people from around the city were sending donations and letters asking how they could help. At night, she found herself checking her phone for updates before going to bed. It was strange. She didn't even know the baby's name, but she thought about her as if she were family. A few days later, she received another call from the officer. "We wanted to let you know that the baby's still doing well," he said, "and the social services team is getting involved now. She'll be placed in temporary care until we know more." "Do they have a name for her?" she asked quietly. "Not yet," he said. "For now, she's listed as Baby Girl Unknown." That name didn't sit right with her. A baby should have a name, she thought, even if just a temporary one, something to be called with love, not just a label on a file. That night she sat by her window staring at the stars. She thought about that moment again. The morning light, the sound of the cry, the fear, the rush of warmth when she held the baby. She whispered softly to herself, "You deserve a name, little one." Days turned into weeks, but the feeling didn't fade. She visited the hospital again, and this time the staff recognized her. "You're the lady who found her," one nurse said with a smile. "You really care about that baby, don't you?" She nodded. "I do. I don't even know why, but I can't stop thinking about her." "She's doing great," the nurse said kindly. "The doctors are calling her Hope just until she's placed." "Hope," she repeated, the word lingering in her mouth. It felt right. After that, she started calling her that too. Hope. The name made her smile, even on hard days. Each time she visited, she saw small changes. Hope's cheeks growing rounder, her tiny hands reaching up, her soft eyes blinking open. The connection between them grew stronger with every visit. One afternoon, while standing by the crib, she whispered quietly, "I don't know what will happen to you, little one, but I hope you find someone who loves you forever." But deep down, a small voice inside her asked, "What if that someone is you?" She didn't dare say it out loud. She wasn't sure what she was allowed to feel, but she knew that the baby had already taken a piece of her heart. As she walked out of the hospital that day, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The air smelled like rain, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something warm spreading inside her. Not just relief, but purpose. That little cry she had heard by the trash wasn't just a sound. It was a call that had woken something in her, something she didn't know she'd been missing, and though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of a bond that would change both of their lives forever. The next few weeks went by quickly, yet every day felt slower for her. She still went to work, came home, cooked, cleaned, and followed her usual routine. But inside, something had changed. Life didn't feel dull anymore. It felt heavy, but in a meaningful way. She thought about the baby constantly, especially at night when the house was quiet. Sometimes she caught herself smiling at nothing, thinking about the little girl called Hope. The name fit her perfectly. Every time she whispered it, she felt warmth in her chest. She began visiting the hospital more often. The nurses knew her now and greeted her with smiles when she came in. They didn't mind her visits. In fact, they said the baby seemed calmer whenever she was around. When she entered the small nursery, Hope would often be awake, her eyes wide and curious, her tiny mouth forming shapes as if trying to speak. She would sit beside the crib, softly talking to her, telling her little stories about the world outside, about the blue sky, the flowers and the songs of birds she heard in the mornings. Hope would listen, sometimes cooing softly, sometimes just staring up with those bright, trusting eyes. Each visit made the bond between them stronger. One day, as she was leaving, a social worker stopped her near the doorway. The woman had a kind face and held a clipboard in her hands. "You're the one who found the baby, right?" she asked. "Yes," she replied. "I'm glad to finally meet you," the social worker said warmly. "You've been coming quite often. The staff says the baby responds really well to you." "She does?" she asked, a little surprised. The woman nodded. "Yes, that's rare, you know. Newborns can sense comfort. She seems to feel safe with you." Hearing that made her heart swell. I just care about her. I can't explain it, but I feel like I was meant to find her." The social worker gave a gentle smile. "Sometimes life works that way. We're still trying to find her biological mother, but so far there aren't any leads. If no family comes forward, she'll be placed in temporary care soon." "Temporary care?" she repeated quietly. "Yes, it's the usual process," the woman explained. "A foster home until adoption or until we find relatives." The words stayed with her all day. She tried to tell herself it was a good thing, that Hope would be safe and cared for, but her heart didn't agree. The thought of the baby going to a stranger's home made her chest ache. That evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the steam curling into the air. The same thought kept circling in her mind. Could she do something? Could she be the one to take care of the baby, even if just for a while? The idea scared her. She had never planned for children, not after everything life had thrown at her. Her job was demanding, her home quiet, but deep down, something whispered that maybe her life had led to this moment for a reason. The next day, she called the social services office. When the same woman answered, she hesitated before speaking. "This is the lady who found the baby," she began softly. "I was wondering, what would it take for someone like me to apply as a foster parent?" There was a short silence on the other end. Then the woman spoke kindly. "It's a process, but it's possible. Would you like to come in and talk about it?" "Yes," she said without thinking twice. That weekend, she sat in a small office with pale blue walls, filling out forms and answering questions. The social worker explained everything carefully: background checks, home visits, and the responsibilities that came with fostering. "It's not a quick process," the woman warned gently. "But if you're serious, we'll guide you through it." "I am," she said firmly. "I don't know why, but I can't let her go. It feels like she's supposed to be with me," the woman smiled. "Sometimes the heart knows before the mind does." In the weeks that followed, her life became a mix of nervous excitement and quiet hope. Inspectors came to her house asking about her job, her home, her routines. She cleaned, rearranged furniture, and even set up a small corner with a crib and a soft blanket just in case. Each visit to the hospital grew more emotional. She told the nurses about her plan, and they supported her. "You're doing something beautiful," one of them said. "That baby already loves you." One morning, as she walked into the nursery, she noticed Hope was more alert than usual. The baby's tiny hand reached out as soon as she leaned over the crib. She smiled and gently held the small fingers in her palm. "Hey there," she whispered. "Guess what? I'm trying to bring you home." The baby made a small sound, a happy little sigh that made her laugh softly. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond herself. It wasn't about getting through another day anymore. It was about building a future for someone else. The process took time, but she was patient. The social worker kept her updated. "Everything looks good so far," she said during one of their calls. "If all goes smoothly, you might be approved soon." She couldn't believe how much hope that sentence gave her, but along with excitement came fear. What if someone came forward to claim the baby? What if the system decided differently? Those thoughts kept her up at night. Still, she held on to faith. She reminded herself that she had already been chosen once, by fate, by that tiny cry on that ordinary morning. One rainy afternoon, her phone rang again. It was the same officer she had spoken to weeks earlier. "I just wanted to let you know," he said. "The investigation is closing. No one has come forward. The baby will soon be cleared for placement." Her heart leapt. "Does that mean she can go into foster care?" "Yes," he said. "And if your application is approved, you'll be contacted soon." She thanked him and sat in silence for a while after the call. She could feel tears stinging her eyes, not from sadness but from overwhelming relief. A few days later, she received another call, this time from the social worker. "I have some news," the woman said. "You've been approved. Would you like to come by tomorrow to complete the paperwork?" For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat felt tight. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course." That night she barely slept. She cleaned the house again, fluffed the pillows, checked the small crib twice. She stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, feeling a nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. The next afternoon, she walked into the hospital one last time, not as a visitor, but as someone ready to bring the baby home. The nurses smiled knowingly. "She's all yours now," one of them said with a grin. When they handed her the baby, she held her close, feeling the warmth of that small body against her chest. Hope blinked up at her, calm and curious. "Hi, little one," she whispered softly. "It's me again. Ready to come home?" The baby made a small sound, almost like an answer. As she walked out of the hospital, the world felt different. Brighter, warmer. The same sun that had shone the morning she found the baby was shining again. But this time it felt like it was smiling at her. She buckled Hope into a car seat she had bought just days earlier, checking it twice to make sure it was safe. Then she sat behind the wheel, her heart full and her hands trembling. For a few seconds she just sat there, staring at the tiny bundle in the seat beside her. The road ahead was unknown, full of challenges, but she didn't care. She wasn't alone anymore. As she drove home, the soft sound of Hope's breathing filled the car. Every streetlight they passed felt like a quiet celebration. Every turn a step toward something new. When they reached home, she carried the baby inside and stood for a moment in the middle of the living room, just looking around. The same house that had once felt too quiet now felt alive. She placed Hope gently in the crib she had prepared and sat beside her, watching her sleep. The small rise and fall of her chest, the peaceful look on her face, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. In that moment, she realized that the cry she had heard weeks ago wasn't just a sound from a baby. It was a call meant for her. A call that led her to this moment. This feeling, this new beginning. She leaned over, kissed the baby's forehead and whispered softly, "You're home now." The first night with the baby felt unreal. The house was quiet except for the small sounds coming from the crib. Soft breaths, an occasional tiny sigh. She sat nearby watching the baby sleep, afraid to close her eyes in case something happened. Every few minutes she leaned closer to make sure the baby was still breathing. It wasn't fear that kept her awake. It was wonder. For so long her house had been filled with silence. Now it had life inside it. Small, fragile, but full of meaning. The air even smelled different, like baby powder and milk. She smiled to herself, realizing how something so small could make a place feel so full. The days that followed were not easy. The baby woke up often, crying softly for milk or comfort. She had to learn quickly how to hold the bottle, how to rock her to sleep, how to tell the difference between a hungry cry and a tired one. At first she made mistakes. Sometimes she mixed the formula too cold or couldn't get the baby to burp, and she would feel helpless. But every time the baby's small hand rested against her arm, she felt courage return. Morning light slowly replaced the darkness, and she would smile down at the baby and whisper, "We did it." One night down, her coworkers noticed the change in her. She came to work tired, yes, but happier than before. There was a new calm in her, a softness that hadn't been there. When her colleagues asked about the baby, she couldn't help but smile. "She's doing well," she'd say proudly, "growing stronger every day." Her phone was now full of pictures, the baby sleeping, stretching, or making funny faces. Even the smallest milestones felt like miracles to her. The first time Hope smiled, she nearly cried. It was a small, crooked smile, but to her it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Weeks passed, and their bond grew deeper. The baby had started recognizing her face and voice. Whenever she entered the room, those tiny eyes would light up. She would pick her up, hold her close, and whisper, "I'm right here. You're safe now." She started keeping a small journal, writing down everything she noticed. The first time Hope laughed. The first time she held her bottle without help. The way she kicked her little legs when she heard music. Every moment felt like something worth remembering. But even in those happy days, there was a small fear that never left her. She knew that as a foster parent, her time with the baby might not last forever. The thought of it made her chest tighten. Sometimes, while watching the baby sleep, she would whisper, "Please don't take her away." One afternoon, she received a call from the social worker. Her heart raced as she answered, afraid of what she might hear. "Don't worry," the woman said quickly. "It's good news. We just wanted to check how things are going." "They're good," she said, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Better than I expected," the woman smiled through her voice. "I can tell. Everyone at the hospital still talks about how lucky that baby is." "She's the one who saved me," she said softly. There was a small pause on the line before the social worker spoke again. "You know, if you ever decide you'd like to make this permanent, you can apply for adoption once the case is closed." Her heart skipped a beat. Adoption. The word hung in the air like a bright light. She hadn't dared think about it, not seriously. But now the thought filled her with both hope and fear. Could she really do that? Could she become the baby's real mother? That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She looked around her small home. The crib in the corner, the pile of baby clothes folded neatly on the table, the bottles drying by the sink. It already felt like a home for two. When she picked up the baby and held her close, she whispered, "Would you like to stay with me forever?" The baby looked up, eyes wide and calm, and rested her head against her shoulder. That was all the answer she needed. Over the next few weeks, she began asking questions about the adoption process. It wasn't simple. There were interviews, background checks, and long waits. But she didn't care. Every form she filled out felt like a promise that she would fight to keep Hope safe. Her friends noticed the change too. "You seem happier," one of them said. She smiled. "I am. I didn't know I could feel this kind of happiness again." Of course, there were hard days too, nights when the baby wouldn't stop crying, Mornings when she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open. But even in those moments, she felt grateful. Tired, yes, but thankful, because now her tiredness had meaning. One weekend, the social worker came by for a home visit. She looked around the small house, noticing the baby toys, the soft blankets, the stack of baby bottles near the sink. "You've made a lovely home," she said kindly. "Thank you," she replied, her hands fidgeting nervously. The woman smiled. "It's clear you love her very much." "I do," she said softly. "I really do." When the visit ended, the woman assured her everything looked good. "Keep doing what you're doing," she said. "You're giving her what she needs most, love and safety." Those words stayed with her. That night she sat by the crib watching Hope sleep. "Love and safety," she repeated quietly. "That's all I ever want to give you." Months went by. The seasons began to change. The baby was growing quickly, sitting up, grabbing toys, and laughing at silly faces. Each new thing she learned filled the house with laughter. One morning, as she was feeding her breakfast, the baby reached out, touched her cheek, and made a small sound, "Ma." She froze, spoon halfway to the baby's mouth. "What did you say?" she whispered. The baby giggled and said it again, "Ma." Tears filled her eyes. It was such a simple sound, but it carried the weight of everything she had ever hoped for. She laughed through the tears and hugged her close. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "It's me." That moment became one of the happiest memories of her life. It made every sleepless night and every struggle worth it. A few days later, she met again with the social worker to discuss the adoption. The process was still moving slowly but surely. The woman smiled when she spoke. "You're almost there," she said. "It's just a matter of time now." Time. That was the one thing she had learned to be patient with. The woman she was before all this had rushed through life, always thinking about the next task, the next day. Now she had learned to slow down, to enjoy the present moment, to listen, to love. That night, after putting the baby to sleep, she sat by the window again, looking at the stars. She thought about the strange chain of events that had brought them together, how a morning like any other had turned into the day her life changed. Sometimes she still wondered about the baby's past, where she came from, who had left her and why. But she no longer let those questions fill her with sadness. Instead, she saw them as reminders of how precious life is, how every ending can lead to a new beginning. Her heart was no longer heavy with worry. It was full of quiet gratitude. She had found a new purpose, and it came in the form of a tiny child who had brought love back into her life. Before going to bed, she leaned over the crib and whispered softly, "You have no idea how much you've changed me." The baby stirred, making a soft sound, and then went still again. As she turned off the light, she realized that she no longer felt like someone living alone. The house had become a home, and her heart had found its peace. For the first time in years, she slept deeply, her dreams filled with laughter, sunlight, and the sound of a baby's gentle breathing, the sound of a future she never saw coming but now couldn't imagine living without. Months turned into a full year, and life found a new rhythm. The mornings that once felt lonely now began with laughter, tiny footsteps, and the soft hum of a baby learning to speak. The house that used to echo with silence now carried the sounds of life, toys rattling, small giggles, the rustle of soft blankets. Every corner of the home told a story of change. She had learned more in that year than in all her years before. She learned patience, real patience, the kind that only comes when you're caring for someone who depends on you completely. She learned that love could grow quietly through simple things, a smile, a hand on her cheek, the warmth of tiny arms around her neck. Hope was growing fast now. Her hair had thickened, her laugh had become stronger, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. She had started to walk, wobbling on tiny legs, always reaching out for something new to explore. Each small step she took filled her with pride and a touch of fear. Sometimes when she watched her play, she still thought about how different things could have been. How one small decision, stopping to check a sound, had changed both their lives. She often told herself that morning wasn't just fate, it was a gift. The adoption process had taken months, full of meetings, visits, and paperwork. She had been nervous every step of the way, afraid that something might go wrong, afraid that someone would appear and take hope away. But every meeting brought her one step closer to making their bond permanent. Finally, one bright morning, The social worker called with a smile in her voice. "Congratulations," she said. "It's official. You're now her legal guardian. She's yours." For a few seconds she couldn't speak. Her throat tightened, her eyes filled with tears. "She's mine?" she whispered, barely believing it. "She's yours," the woman repeated gently. When she hung up, she sat still for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then she picked up Hope, who was sitting on the floor playing with her stuffed toy, and hugged her tight. "You hear that?" she whispered. "You're home forever." The baby laughed, clapping her small hands without understanding what had just happened. But to her that laugh meant everything. That night she cooked a small meal, nothing fancy, just their favorite simple dinner, and they celebrated quietly. She placed a tiny cupcake on the table, put a candle on it, and whispered, "This is for us, for how far we've come." She didn't make a wish before blowing out the candle. She didn't need to. Her wish had already come true. Over the next months, life settled into something steady and beautiful. Every morning started with the baby's laughter. Every evening ended with soft lullabies and the rhythm of breathing as Hope drifted to sleep in her arms. She had once feared the silence of her home. Now she cherished the quiet moments, the peaceful hum of the night, the stillness after a long day. She would sit in the rocking chair, Hope sleeping against her chest, and think about how far they had come from that cold morning by the trash bins. Her friends often asked her if she ever thought about what her life would have been like if she hadn't stopped that morning. She always smiled and said, "I don't think about that, because I can't imagine a life without her." There were still challenges, of course. Some nights were sleepless. Some days felt too long. Money was tight at times, and balancing work with motherhood was hard. But she wouldn't trade any of it. Every laugh, every new word, every hug made the struggles disappear. Hope started speaking more, her small voice filling the rooms with new words every day. "Mama," she'd call from across the room, and every time it felt like the first time all over again. Sometimes they would go for walks together, the same path she had taken that fateful morning. The trash bins still stood in a row at the curb, but now they didn't seem ordinary anymore. She would glance at them and feel a strange sense of gratitude. What once was a place of sadness had become a symbol of second chances. One day, while walking past that spot with Hope in her stroller, she stopped and looked around. The morning light was just like that day, soft, golden, peaceful. She lifted Hope out of the stroller and held her close. "This is where I found you," she whispered gently. "Right here." Hope looked up at her, curious but calm, her small hand reaching for her face. She smiled through tears. "You changed my life, little one. You saved me without even knowing it." As Hope grew older, she started to notice that her mother liked to tell stories, not fairy tales, but real ones. Every night before bed, she would tell her stories about kindness, courage, and how sometimes miracles hide in the most unexpected places. When Hope was old enough to understand, she would hear her story for the first time. The story of how a tiny cry had led to love, family, and a new beginning. But that moment was still far ahead. For now, it was enough that they had each other. Years later, their life had settled into a beautiful routine. Hope went to school, made friends, and grew into a bright, curious child. Every morning before leaving for work, she would tie Hope's shoes, pack her lunch, and say, "Remember, you're my miracle." Hope would laugh and say, "And you're mine." They kept a small photo on the living room shelf, the two of them on the day the adoption was finalized. Both smiling, both holding on to each other like they never wanted to let go. The caption she had written beneath it read, "Some cries are meant to be heard." Sometimes people who heard their story would ask, "Do you ever wonder why it was you who found her?" And she would answer simply, "Because I needed saving too." As the years passed, their bond only grew stronger. The baby she had once held in trembling arms became a young girl who brought laughter, warmth, and light wherever she went. The house that had once been silent had turned into a place filled with stories, drawings on the walls, and the constant sound of love. Every year, on the same day she had found Hope, they celebrated quietly. They called it their Heart Day. They would bake a small cake together, light a candle, and share stories about life, love, and the magic of being found. When Hope was old enough to understand her story, she didn't cry. She just hugged her mother tightly and said, "You heard me when no one else did." That simple sentence stayed with her forever. She often thought back to that morning, the cold air, the quiet street, the row of trash bins. It had been such an ordinary day, yet it had changed everything. That sound, that cry had not just called her. It had awakened something deep within her heart, something that had been asleep for too long. Now, years later, she finally understood what it all meant. Life has a way of placing us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't understand why. Sometimes, what seems like a small moment, a sound, a choice, a step, can change everything. Whenever she looked at Hope, she saw not just a child but a miracle, proof that even in the darkest moments, light can find a way through. On quiet evenings, when the world outside was calm and the stars shimmered above, she would sit by the window watching Hope sleep peacefully. The soft rhythm of her breathing was still her favorite sound, and sometimes she would whisper into the stillness. That cry saved us both. Years passed and time moved the way it always does, quietly without asking for permission. Seasons came and went, and the little baby who had once fit in the crook of her arm grew taller, stronger, and full of life. Hope was no longer a small child. She was now a young woman, with bright eyes and the same gentle smile that had once melted her mother's heart when she was just a baby. Her laughter still filled the house, but it had changed. It was deeper now, full of confidence and warmth. The house itself had changed too. It was no longer just a place where two people lived. It had become a home built with years of love, shared meals, birthday candles, late-night talks, and the soft echoes of laughter that lingered in every room. On the walls hung photos of their journey, Hope's first steps, her first day at school, the two of them holding hands on long walks. Sometimes, when the evenings grew quiet, she would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and watch the sun sink low, painting the sky with shades of gold and orange. Hope would join her, sitting beside her with her head resting on her shoulder. Those moments always felt like home, no matter how many years went by. One evening, as the wind moved gently through the trees, Hope asked softly, "Do you ever think about that day?" Her mother smiled, eyes still on the horizon. "Every single day," she said. Hope nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I've read the story you wrote about it," she said. "The one you kept in that old journal." She smiled again, a little embarrassed. "That was never meant to be read. It was just something I wrote so I wouldn't forget." Hope turned to her and said, "I'm glad you wrote it, because I think that story isn't just about me. It's about you too." The words caught her off guard. For a moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we saved each other." Hope smiled and leaned closer. "You always say that." "Because it's true," she replied. Silence fell again, the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty. The kind that carries years of shared memories. That night, after Hope went to bed, she took out the old journal. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with time. She flipped through the pages, reading her own handwriting from years ago, shaky words written in exhaustion and love. She had written about the first night, about the fear, the joy, and the quiet hope that had filled her heart. She had written about the sleepless nights and the long mornings, about laughter and tears, and about how love had slowly grown between them like sunlight through clouds. As she read, she realized how far they had come. Back then, she had been a woman who thought her best days were behind her. But that small cry from the trash had changed everything. It had reminded her that even when life feels still, it can surprise you. That even in dark moments, light can find its way through. She turned to the last blank page in the journal and took a pen. She hesitated for a moment, then began to write. "It's been many years now since I first heard that cry. Hope is grown, strong, and kind. She has her own dreams and her own way of seeing the world. I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I had walked past that morning without stopping. But then I realize I wouldn't be me. I wouldn't have learned what love truly means. I wouldn't have found my purpose. That cry didn't just change my life. It gave me life again." When she finished writing, she closed the journal and held it close to her chest. A quiet peace filled the room. In the following days, life continued as it always did, simple and steady. Hope was preparing to leave for college, full of plans and excitement. The house felt both proud and heavy with the thought of her going. The night before Hope left, they sat together on the porch again. The stars were bright and the air was cool. Hope looked at her mother and said softly, "I'm going to miss you every day." She smiled and brushed a strand of hair from Hope's face. "You'll do amazing things." "I know it," Hope hesitated. "Do you think you'll be okay here alone?" Her smile didn't fade. "I was never alone after I found you. And I won't be alone now. You'll always be part of me no matter where you go." Hope's eyes shimmered as she leaned in to hug her. "You'll always be part of me too." They sat there for a long time just holding on to each other. The night around them quiet except for the sound of the wind. The next morning came with soft light streaming through the windows. Hope's bags were packed, her shoes by the door. They hugged once more, long and tight, before Hope stepped outside. As she watched her daughter walk down the path, her heart ached. But it wasn't the ache of loss. It was the ache of love, the kind that grows so deep it becomes part of you. When the car disappeared down the road, she went back inside. The house felt different, quieter, yes, but still warm. On the kitchen table sat a folded note. She opened it slowly and smiled as she read Hope's handwriting. "For the woman who heard my cry. For the one who chose love when she didn't have to. Thank you for teaching me that kindness changes everything. Wherever I go, I'll carry your heart with me." Tears filled her eyes as she folded the note back carefully. She placed it inside the old journal between the first and last pages, between the moment their story began and the moment it came full circle. She sat by the window, looking out at the same street where everything had started. The trash bins were still there, lined up as they always had been. She smiled through tears, whispering, "Some cries are meant to be heard." As the years continued to pass, she stayed in that same house. She grew older but never lonely. Hope visited often, sometimes with stories about college, sometimes just to sit beside her and talk about life. And every year, on the same day they had found each other, they still celebrated their Heart Day. No matter how far apart they were, one would always call the other. On one of those anniversaries, Hope brought her a small gift, a framed photo. Inside was a picture of the two of them from years ago, standing on that same street where they first met, smiling under the morning sun. Below the photo were engraved words, "You turned a cry into a beginning." She placed that frame on her bedside table, where it stayed from then on. Every morning when she woke, it was the first thing she saw. It reminded her that life's most beautiful moments often start in the quietest, most unexpected ways. Time moved forward again, as it always does. The seasons kept changing and life kept unfolding. But no matter how old she became, she never forgot that day. The sound of that cry, the feeling of holding something so small and fragile, and the warmth that followed. She had once believed her life was ordinary. Now she knew better. Her life had been extraordinary, not because of big moments or grand adventures, but because of love. Because she chose to stop, to listen, and to care. Love, she realized, doesn't always arrive with a plan. Sometimes it comes wrapped in a cry, waiting for someone to notice, and because she did, 2 lives were forever changed. When the evening light touched the old photo frame beside her bed, she smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you for calling me that day." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a faint echo, gentle and kind, like the memory of a cry that had once changed everything. And with that thought, peace filled her heart once more, because some cries aren't just sounds, they're beginnings, and hers was one she was meant to hear. She didn't know if life would ever bring her something greater than this, but she didn't need it to. She had found her purpose the day she decided to turn back and listen, because sometimes the smallest cries lead to the biggest miracles.